The TurboGrafx-16, or the PC engine as it's known abroad, is one of those video game consoles where you allegedly seldom run into what would be described as a genuinely bad game in its library. Not that those don't exist, because they do, but more often than not, you're more likely to run into a good game than a bad one in regards to the Turbo's software offerings. Well, for today's video presentation thing, we're looking at one of the lesser regarded titles in said library. Night Creatures, released in 1991 courtesy of developers Manley and Associates, the same people responsible for the Wizard of Oz video game on Super Nintendo. Press start to run, do I really want to? Night Creatures places you in the role of a young lad who has been marked by the Queen of Darkness, and your only hope of lifting this foul curse is to seek out this foul creature of the night and kill her before you yourself become one with the night or something at the crack of dawn. Night Creatures is an open-ended adventure game of sorts where you roam around this vast, spooky land searching for items and weapons that will aid you in your quest to lift the dreaded curse. Along the way, you'll fight bosses, and as a side effect of the curse you bear, when you defeat a boss, you'll gain an ability to transform into different creatures, up to 4, including a wolf, an owl, a badger, and even a bear. And these have different functions and purposes, as do most of the items that you will collect along your way. Vitality is something you can expand upon and refill easily, as enemies will drop little glowing things to restore some of it, but run out of vitality and you die, and it's game over. And you only have 1 life and 3 continues to make it through these haunted grounds in one piece and with your soul intact, or something to that extent. So the gimmick of transforming into other animals, on paper at least, makes Night Creatures a derivative of Sega arcade classic Altered Beast. Except here you turn into actual animals and not just man-mutant versions of said animals, which probably would have been better off, but we're jumping ahead here. To transform into an animal, pause the game with the run button, move the cursor to the animal icon and press a button to transform into said animal. While you are transformed, your vitality will slowly ebb away, so it's imperative that your transformations are brief and used to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished, and that's all these are really good for. The transformations are limited in use. You might need them to access a couple entryways here and there, but that's about the extent of it. Most of the game has you in human form as a result of not only the transformation's limited applications, but also because whenever you're transformed, again, your vitality gradually drains. So really, it's more trouble than it's worth, and it's one of the main gimmicks of Night Creatures, which is a major red flag. Night Creatures has a couple good ideas going for it. Open-ended action platform game where you explore every nook and cranny to find tools to aid you in your quest before dawn hits and you become a creature of the night. Though realistically, a lot of these nooks and crannies are essentially motherfucking time vampires that serve no goddamn purpose. The ability to transform into different animals, even if those forms prove somewhat limited and trivial in their usefulness. But it is the execution that leaves much to be desired, starting with the constant spawning of enemies that seem to be relentless and giving you no time to gain your bearings. There's also no recovery between hits, meaning you can be on the receiving end of a rather unfortunate bombardment of foes that can dwindle your health to nothing in a couple of seconds, which is even more annoying with flying enemies, especially those you cannot kill. And remember, you only have 3 continues and only 1 life per continue, and these could exhaust themselves in an instant if you're not careful. There's no password support. There is a save feature, however, but only if you have one of those turbo booster gimmicks, or if you're playing this on a turbo CD or duo or whatever. Otherwise it's a one-shot deal. But more than likely, if you are going to be playing Night Creatures, it'll probably be on an emulator with save states and such, but that taints the experience somewhat since you could easily nullify the misery, so why am I even bothering? Shut off the turbo, turn on the Wii, load up the homebrew, there we go. There is also the strange, almost baffling mechanic of weapons only harming certain enemies. For the rest, it'll either take a million hits or worse, the weapon will pass through the foe like it was nothing and you'll end up taking a hit. And considering the game already has some questionable collision detection, that is not exactly something you'd want as any semblance of a feature in your video game. The idea, of course, is you have to use specific weapons to kill specific foes, or at least do considerable harm to those specific targets, which is not an entirely bad idea if it's done properly. And I don't think Night Creatures does it so, especially considering the hit detection is very, very spotty. So spotty it's making me sick. Literally, I just got a cold playing this thing. Speaking of picking weapons, to do so, you pause the game, you use the D-pad to switch to your inventory, highlight a weapon you want to use, and press a button to arm said weapon. If you press run to unpause without this step, you won't have the new weapon on hand, and even then, sometimes the input will not register. Night Creatures is a nightmare to slog through. It controls somewhat awkwardly, it's not entirely responsive. Anyone who wants to complain about stairs in the old Castlevanias will want to stay away from Night Creatures because trying to climb stairs here is a science and experiment in and of itself. And while the game does have a save feature with a booster or duo in place, don't expect it to be entirely helpful. You still lose a continue and these get recorded into the save, so it's mostly delaying the inevitable game over time to play something else. Which probably isn't the worst idea in the world, but whatever. For all the complaints I have with regards to gameplay, I do want to compliment the graphical aspect of the game. Night Creatures does provide a nice set of spooky scenery for you to traverse in, it has a nice variety of creature designs, the transformation effect is actually pretty neat, except if you're taking hits during said transformation, which is cheap and stupid. Sometimes, however, it can be difficult to discern what's part of the scenery and what are things you could actually interact with. This plant-like thing in the forest, for example, seems to be part of the background, but no, the plant hurts you, and this gets me more often than not. Other than that, this is not a bad looking game, and honestly, it's Night Creatures' only redeeming quality for whatever that's actually worth. Sound, on the other hand, leaves much to be desired. Night Creatures is probably one of the weaker sounding Turbo games I've heard. There's only a couple spooky tracks in the entire game, and while they try to evoke a bit of a spooky vibe to the proceedings, they're perhaps a bit too tinny sounding to be effective and ended up being more annoying than actually terrifying. Ditto for the sound effects, which sound better suited on a Master System game. Actually, I tell a lie. The Master System can produce better sound effects than this Turbo game, and I am generally not a fan of Master System sound effects, so make of that what you will. I have heard many bad things about Night Creatures before actually sitting down to play it, and I'm happy to report that I was not disappointed with this game. It definitely delivered a crud in spades. Yeah, Night Creatures isn't a particularly good game, which is a shame because this is one of those games that held an interesting premise on paper and certainly looks to be a fun little spooky romp perfect for the Halloween season, but just needed that bit of polish or soul to fix some of the more questionable bits that keeps the whole thing from becoming a giant mess. By no means would I recommend Night Creatures to anyone looking for a spooky romp in the woods. It is really, really bad. You know, I'm not quite sure if I used the phrase spooky romp enough times in this video. I also do not care. I'm going to bed. Good night.